What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. I am Marcas Grant, joined by Dwayne McFarland, fresh out of the bunker as always. And here we are, Dwayne, just a couple of weeks to the fantasy postseason. And I know it's a short week. I guess we only have one show this week just because of the Thanksgiving holiday, but we got plenty to feast on, I guess, fantasy wise. So I guess we are just, let's just dive in, right? How are you feeling today?
Man, I'm feeling good. This is one of my favorite weeks of the year. Like the Thanksgiving week, having the three games on Thursday, get to hang out with the family, overindulge myself with too much food, pie, football. Like what, I don't know. There's nothing not to like, to be honest, about this week for a football fan, in my opinion.
I completely agree with you. It's going to be a great time. There are three, what I think, really interesting games on Thursday. We'll dive into some things around those as we get through the utilization report, which, by the way, you can check out, of course, at fantasylife.com. We'll also have some previews of some other things that may happen on Sunday through the rest of the week, because, as I mentioned, just the one show for us this week. But we got plenty to talk about. We will also talk about just some regular football, because a couple of teams in the NFC have flexed their muscles recently, and it's going to be interesting to see whether or not we believe they're for real and can they be a threat to the Eagles perhaps in the NFC. But let's get started first, Dwayne, with some injury news. A lot of big injuries happened over the week that really I think are going to have an impact on fantasy rosters going forward. One of them being Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and not so much because we thought Edwards-Helaire was going to turn into some fantasy stud. It seems like that ship has very much sailed for him this season, but that sort of clears things up in the backfield. And I know we were frustrated and confused trying to figure out between CEH and Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon. With one less person there occupying space in that backfield, do you feel a little more clarity about how we approach the Chiefs running backs?
Yeah, and we started to get that last week. Whenever Pacheco really took over most of the early down work, he was the leading rush, attempt player last week. This week we saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire out there in the beginning of the game as well, so it looked like it maybe was going to go back to more of a split. And Andy Reid had said as much, in the press earlier last week. And with Clyde Edwards-Helaire out, it just all went back to Pacheco. So it is pretty clear now. Like we're going to have Pacheco as the early down option. You're going to have Jerick McKinnon still out there on passing downs. And it is a pass first offense. They also are a first offense inside the 5 yard line. The Chiefs are actually one of the teams that throw the ball the least once they're inside the five, but they are also the number one scoring offense in the league. So even though you're throwing the ball more, not quite running it as much, there's still going to be a lot of opportunity for Pacheco to score touchdowns when you're down inside the five. We know that's the area where the Chiefs like to get creative. They get guys like Mecole Hardman, Kadarius Toney, and oh wait, those guys are not available right now. So these next couple of weeks could be really fruitful for Isaiah Pacheco. I look at him as a low end RB2 heading into next week, but he could have that RB1 upside in any game because I think there's always a chance that he could score 2 rushing touchdowns.
I definitely like Pacheco, especially this past week. It felt like a smash spot, and he took advantage of it with over 100 yards against a bad Chargers run defense. But uh, there seems to be a very clear uh, delineation between what the roles are there between
Yeah.
Pacheco and McKinnon. So now no CEH sort of clears that whole thing up, which I think only helps a whole lot of us. In Cincinnati, Joe Mixon went into concussion protocol. Samaje Perine stepped in, scored 3 touchdowns. It goes without saying, but we'll say it anyway. You can't expect Samaje Perine to score 3 touchdowns every week. But as long as Mixon is in the protocol, and we're not sure of his status for the week, it feels like Perine, at least I know he's a short-term sort of situation, but if you need a running back, this seems like a really good spot to pick up, at least, kind of to bridge the gap until Mixon comes back for fantasy managers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was in an every down role after Mixon left the game, 70% of the snaps, 52% route participation, 100% of the long down and distance work, 100% of the 2 minute offense, and all the stuff down inside the five or in the short down and distance stuff. So, and we saw that they're willing to throw him the ball in the passing game. Something that we had seen Mixon pick up over the last couple of games, especially since Jamar Chase has been out. Now we are hearing that Chase could start to be integrated back in this week. We'll see what the rest of the practice reports look like. But yeah, if we're going to have a situation where P Ryan is going to be the starter, which could happen, it's been kind of interesting, Marcus. Like I felt like early in the year there was this shift, after the Tua injury, where suddenly any player that got a concussion was usually missing the next game, and we thought, wow, maybe this is the new status quo. But then over the last several weeks, it's really swung back to kind of how it was. And that's not to say the teams aren't going through the protocol properly. I don't know what caused the change, but now we're seeing guys more like what we were used to. That you may have a concussion and you're back the next game. So we'll have to see where that lies this week for Joe Mixon, whether he's going to be able to make it back or not. But I think at the end of the day, like what this also does is it just reminds us that P. Ryan is one of these guys that we really don't ever talk about,
Hmm.
that he's the every down backup if something happens to Joe Mixon. Now, Chris Evans, I believe, was inactive this last weekend. He's battled an injury, but he hasn't really been anything all year. He was a guy I know we kind of had hopes around before the season, like late round stash. He's not really gotten on the field at all. So I really do believe that it would be almost a 1-for-1 trade off, that P. Ryan would become Joe Mixon. And here's the thing, like Joe Mixon hasn't been that efficient either. P. Ryan is not a hyper efficient player, but we've seen what can happen with Mixon whenever you're in an offense that's down around the 5 yard line a lot. You get chances to score. So I do like P. Ryan a lot. And even if you miss, right, and you get Joe Mixon back, which that's what we want. We want players healthy. We want Joe Mixon back. But I think it's just that reminder that this is a guy that could be worth having on your roster if you play in a deeper league and you're just say you're sitting there and you've got a really nice RB1, your RB2 is okay. Maybe you've got one stash option that you like, or something like that. This could be another one, right? It gives you two bullets potentially that you would have an opportunity to have an every down back if something happened to one of the starters. And we just forget about P. Ryan in that conversation a lot, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you actually sort of answered my next question about Chris Evans. I just know that there's going to be some fantasy hipster who's playing in like a 2014 league that's going to suggest that you go out and get Chris Evans this week. So for most of you, it probably is not going to be an issue, but I'm sure there's somebody out there who may ask the question or may try to tout him on social media. Mike Williams came back after an ankle injury, did not stay on the field very long because he seems to aggravate that ankle injury and went back out. Now, I don't know about you. I had a lot of people who hit me up and just kind of frustrated because they'd had Josh Palmer. They heard that Williams and Keenan Allen were going to be back, so they moved on from Josh Palmer. Maybe they benched him, maybe they dropped him, only to watch him have a good game because Mike Williams got hurt and Keenan Allen was just sort of meh. So I mean, I guess now if you dropped him, are you scrambling to pick him up? And if you held on to him and you benched him, are you willing to put him back in a lineup this week?
Yeah, I think he moves back into wide receiver 3 status if we're gonna be without Mike Williams, and I totally get it. Jordan Fiegelman and I took a lot of questions on AMP on Sunday that were revolving around Josh Palmer. What to do with him? Do you drop him? Do you start him? We pretty much told everyone to bench him, and there were cases where it was like, "Look, you could drop him, like, if you feel you have a roster need in another spot." Unfortunately, we are not Nostradamus, right? We can't predict every injury that will happen. Now, we did call out the fact that, look, Allen has been prone to re-injuring himself this year. Mike Williams is a guy that's battled quite a few injuries. So, I mean, he's still at a minimum, he was always still going to be, a handcuff wide receiver because he had two paths to potentially get back on the field. And so it does look like that's going to happen. The most impressive thing for me with Palmer is honestly like he's had some nice target games, but like his target shares have not been very good all season. And so it's really looked like a guy that basically just getting propped up by by an offense with volume, which is okay. Like, whatever way you get there in fantasy, it doesn't matter. Like fantasy points are fantasy points. But typically, with guys that we think will continue to produce over time, they show a better ability to earn targets. He actually did really well. This was his best game of the season. He had a 30% target share. He did have two plays where the defense left him pretty much uncovered for touchdowns, but that's okay. Like if you're out there doing your job, sometimes good fortune comes to you. So yeah, I do look at Palmer as being back into the wide receiver 3 conversation. I do think he's still a sell high. Like if you're in a league that allows trades or if you're in a dynasty type setting, I think right now coming off of a game like that, some people are probably going to get overly excited about Josh Palmer. Now, if you need him and he's starting for you this week, and your trade deadline's coming, well, then you just have a tough decision to make. Like you just go ahead and use him and just eat it, even though he may not have the great long term profile. I mean, that's something that you guys have to make a decision on.
Right, and but I went into the season thinking Palmer really had some late round draft value, a guy that you wanted on your roster, just because we wanted pieces of the Charger offense, the Charger passing game. Injuries have sort of changed how we feel about it, but I think Palmer showed us the other night against Kansas City what exactly he can do in the right situation. So, like Dwayne said, if you need him in a lineup this week, I would by all means throw him in there. Hopefully, Mike Williams is whatever. If he misses time, hopefully it's not a long absence. We'd love to see him back on the field because I think it just helps everybody, or Justin Herbert included, in that Charger offense. Couple of running backs that no longer have jobs, at least as of the time we're recording this, don't have jobs. Melvin Gordon was released by the Broncos on Monday. Darrell Henderson was released by the Rams on Tuesday. Who knows what happens, whether one or both of these guys land somewhere else? I'd like to think so, just because they're still talented players. But does this automatically mean a boost for the guys that are left behind on their respective rosters now?
Yeah, very interested in your thoughts on this one. But first, I have a bone to pick, with Sean McVay. I wrote the utilization report. I had already finished the Rams like by like 1 o'clock yesterday. And this morning I woke up and I saw the quote from him that I guess came late yesterday that Darrell Henderson had some sort of an injury right before the game. He just didn't feel right. So they limited him to 6% of the snaps. So I went to, my editors and let them know, hey, let's make this update to the Rams. It was really because Darrell Henderson, was hurt. He didn't get many, opportunities this past week. And then, like, by the end of the day today, like, they're releasing him. So I'm just like, I should have just left it. Like, it would have been fine. So now I got to go back and make another edit. But it is what it is. So we'll do that after the show today. But yeah, I think, we'll just start off there, with the Rams. We kind of saw what they would do. They gave most of the rushing work to Cam Akers, but really the larger snap role and all of the passing down work went to Kyron Williams. And so it was almost like Williams took over Darrell Henderson's old role. Okay. So I think that's what we're going to have. Akers, look, it's not being the early down back on a team that trails all the time, that doesn't get down inside the five very often, a bad offense as far as scoring, isn't really a recipe for a lot of fantasy points. So even though he does pick up some work, I still struggle, Marcus, to think of him as anything more than like a low end RB3. It's kind of like I don't know, how excited are we, about, James Robinson, which that's now a
Mhm.
three-way backfield, but it was a two. Like, you weren't that excited about James Robinson, right?
Right.
Might get more of the carries than Michael Carter, but in a bad offense. It's the same kind of thing, really, for Akers. If there were one of the two that I wanted to pick up in LA, and you can give me your thoughts here, I do think it's Williams just because I have the unknown upside, and they're starving for someone to throw the ball to. And if he's going to be out there in the 2 minute offense, if he's going to handle all the third down work, all that kind of stuff, I could really see this being like him and Tyler Higbee because none of the receivers have really stepped up.
Well, I would like Williams one because I know we always have a tendency to kind of go toward the newer, shinier thing, and we've seen Cam Akers for a little bit. I also, and this is just purely kind of based on what we have seen, I would take Williams just because it seems like he's least likely to end up in Sean McVay's doghouse
I
again. I
think you're right.
mean, we've gone back and forth with Cam Akers and Sean McVay. I saw somebody tweet earlier today that they are sort of kind of Ross and Rachel for the fantasy football crowd because you just never know. Are they on a break? Like, who really knows? At least with Kyron Williams, you get the sense that he's sort of in good stead, at least for the long term. So maybe that's the reason to kind of lean with him a little bit there. But that's that. I would say I do like Latavius Murray. I don't know how you feel about Latavius Murray in Denver now with Melvin Gordon out of the way. Chase Edmonds is hurt. Again, I know it's another situation where it's a bad offense. They don't score a whole lot of points. I know they're not necessarily in the red zone, but I don't really see any threats to Latavius Murray getting any opportunities there in Denver.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with Murray. You at least have to assume like he's going to probably be a low end RB2 just because, more than likely the volume will be there. We'll see what happens with Marlon Mack. Like, he could be more involved. He's a guy that called up off the practice squad. And to be honest, like, I've had some people, oh man, Marlon Mack's not going to be anything. And I see that. And I'm like, yeah, but we also said the same thing about Latavius Murray. And here we are, a guy that's, 33 years old and he's going to be getting all these touches. So I think that there is an opportunity there for Mac. But to your point, if I had to pick, I would pick Murray. Denver's offense is not inspiring to, as you mentioned, they're 32nd in touchdown drives converted to touchdowns. Sorry, in scoring drives converted to in drives converted to touchdowns, only 11%. So not very much. They don't get down inside the five very often, which is really where Murray's come through. Whenever he's managed to put up a decent fantasy point total, it's been because he's getting that short yardage touchdown. So he should get all of those. But if he does pick up the passing downs by some chance, then yeah, he's gonna be a low end RB2, even if Denver's offense is really bad. So I do think that he would be the priority out of all of these guys we've just talked about if you're trying to grab one.
I saw something earlier in the week that said, actually going into last week before the Broncos game against the Raiders, that if Denver had been able to score 20 points a game, I mean, just average 20 points a game, which doesn't really seem like
Yeah.
all that much, they probably would have been 8-1 just because their defense rarely gives up 20 points. They gave up 22 to Las Vegas, ended up losing that game in overtime. But I think it just goes to show how bad this offense has been versus how good that defense has been, which has got to be frustrating for Broncos fans, but also makes me a little bit leery of starting any Broncos in fantasy so far for the rest of the season. Last one, and I'm just going to read this the way it's written on the show sheet. Kadarius Toney, dot, 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 damn. I mean, like, like, I don't really know what else to say about it, right? Because everybody, I mean, literally everybody across the fantasy space was looking forward to what was going to happen. You have Juju out, Miko Hardman out. This team just hurting and needing wide receivers. It just seemed like the ultimate smash spot for Kadarius Toney. The hamstring acts up again, and we barely see him on the field. At this point, I just don't even know what to say about it anymore, other than it is just supremely frustrating. I'm sure it's supremely frustrating for him. I know it's frustrating for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know me. Like, I've got a lot of Kadarius Toney, so it was a bad weekend. Like in leagues where I know I needed wins, because what I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in a lot of my leagues this year, no one's breaking away, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a bunch of teams muddled at the top at like 8-2, 7-3, 6-4. Those are the records that make up like 70% of my fantasy teams this year. But when I look at them, normally if I looked at my teams and my records were that good, like across so many, I would be like, man, I'm having a monster year. But like when I go look at the teams, I'm like, it's like I'm up a week. The next week, I'm like, I barely win. Like the next week, I may win big, and then the next week, I lose. It's like you can't really get a lot of momentum going. And so I was excited to have a player like Tony to be able to potentially stick in the into the lineups and get a spark plug, and then you end up getting a donut that actually ultimately cost me multiple huge wins. Probably cost me a lot of money, to be honest, with
Mm-hmm.
what happened with Kadarius Tony. And I know we tend to shy away, and I still do. Like to me, injured players are injured until they're not. I've
Mm-hmm.
just seen it too many times where there's a guy that we all know he's injury prone, and then he's not. We've seen it. Keenan Allen was one of those guys. Now I know this year's not a great example because he's been hurt again. But there was a time period where Keenan Allen, you could always get a discount on him on drafts, even though, he was a top 12 talent, just because somebody would be saying, oh, no, he's going to get hurt again. He's going to get hurt. And then he had multiple years where he wasn't hurt at all. So these things can be tricky. And it's hard to like get your mind around it. But like, I know that recency bias is like a very powerful drug. And even for me, it's going to be really hard now to click on Kadarius Tony's name just because he honestly has just hurt me so many times, Marcus. He has hurt me personally. Like we're Ross and Rachel. I'm wounded. I am very wounded. I don't know what to do here with Kadarius Toney.
Yeah, it's gonna be really really hard. I'm sure next year when we come to draft season, people will be in on him. But I guess the upside is for drafters, it will come at a discount just because of that. I mean, you talk about those guys who are you're hurt until you're not. Austin Eckler, I think, was one of those guys where his first couple years in the league, he would suffer some injuries and he'd be out for a while, and people were sort of down on him. In the last few years, he's been able to stay healthy, and he's been arguably one of the best running backs, maybe the best running back in fantasy football. So it's frustrating for everybody involved. I know for Tony, he would love to be out there. The Chiefs would love to have him out there. Fantasy managers would love to have him out here. But the wait continues to see how much he can be productive there. Hey, by the way, we have a brand new tool that just launched at fantasylife.com. It is the Game Hub tool there. You should be sure to go check it out. It has all of the info you need for every NFL game organized into one convenient place for you. Best part, it is 100% free. Free 99, which is the best price of them all. It's got fantasy information, it's got sports betting information, it's got DFS pick'ems, it's got literally everything you want about every single game each and every week on the NFL slate. Dwayne, it is an absolutely amazing thing people should get in on.
Yeah, there's picks on there for every single game. And what I love about it, like if folks listen to this show, you probably know, like one of the reasons I got into the fantasy football space and the analysis is I would hear a lot of takes like back in the day, and then there wouldn't always be like, here's why, right? Or there would be a here's why, but then there would be no context as to like, okay, well, historically, does that why mean anything? Or like, is this just a why because like it's the words that you found, to write on the page to, fill it up and have some content to put out. And what I love about the team that, we've built here at Fantasy Life is we've just got people that are really smart that look at historical trends. They're really looking for what are the things you should care about. And it's beyond, me. It's not just utilization and things like that. We have a really good betting team. And so the reasoning for why those bets are there is my favorite part. So people should definitely check that out. And you can just get to where, like, once you're doing that, you start following your favorite experts from Fantasy Life. There will probably be somebody that you gravitate to, probably the people that are winning the most. But the beauty is, it's also a teach you how to fish kind of thing because you're going to understand why we're making those picks. So, yeah, super excited about this launch.
And that is, I think, the best part too. It's not just handing you the information, sort of giving you the reasoning, the logic, and the tools to sort of make those calls on your own too, as you get more involved and more immersed in the whole thing. So definitely go check it out. FantasyLife.com, just one to add to the bevy of tools there to help make you better at all the things across the fantasy and sports betting space. Speaking of which, the utilization report has been there for a while, and that's been helping us out. So we always like to take a look at it, especially as we get toward the start of week 12. We've got Thanksgiving coming up. So just, a kind of a for organizational purposes here, we'll go through all the guys on the Thanksgiving slate. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the guys that are playing on Sunday as well. So let's go position by position for Thursday, starting at quarterback. Dak Prescott, who I know he didn't necessarily have he had a really good game. It was the Tony Pollard show there for the Cowboys against the Minnesota Vikings, but Dak Prescott looks like he's back. He's rolling again. This whole Cowboy offense is looking very formidable, and a really good opportunity for him coming up this week. You like him. You kind of moved him up in terms of, I know the rankings aren't necessarily done, but in terms of what you expect from him this
Yeah.
week, you're very optimistic about Dak Prescott this week, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, just overall period, in the utilization report, I did give him an upgrade. I think he's a mid-range QB1 going forward. And you kind of hinted on something there as you talked about Prescott, right? Like when you look at the numbers themselves, they don't like just blow you away. But what you have to make sure you're doing this year is you're stepping back, especially with quarterbacks, and you're looking at them in the context of what's going on in the league. And if you look at it, passing yardage and touchdowns are down across the NFL. Over the last 3 seasons, teams have averaged 250 yards and 1.6 touchdowns per game via the air. This year, 237 and 1.4. We have the lowest PFF passing grades in its history. In the history of PFF having passing grades, grading quarterbacks, it's never been this low. And so this change that we have seen with defenses, basically, it's we can go back to our analytics rant show like that we had several weeks ago, where we just kind of went off on the new defensive coverages and how it's no fun anymore. It's kind of like the shift. That it's definitely having an impact. And so when you take it in that context, and then I give you these numbers. Okay, Dak Prescott has 2 plus touchdowns and at least 250 yards in over his last 3 games. Normally, we'd be like, "So what? That's a high-end QB2, Dwayne, not this year." This year, that is a low-end QB1 at worst, and it's most likely a mid-range QB2 in a lot of weeks. So, I do like Dak. I also just like the fact, Marcus, that they seem to be really kinda, they're getting into a groove is what I think, and we'll talk about Pollard here in a second, but I think he can be a huge catalyst to this thing. Getting him involved in the passing game is just something they have not done until this last week with the return of Ezekiel Elliott.
So I think that feels like an easy transition to Tony Pollard because he did have the huge blow up game there, nearly 200 scrimmage yards, had a couple of receiving touchdowns, just big play after big play after big play. And we knew coming into the week that he was going to get more touches than Zeke was, and obviously it just showed up really really big. You've given him an upgrade, and that's not really a surprise. I guess by transference, Zeke probably gets a downgrade as well. I mean, do we envision a scenario where this really becomes the Tony Pollard show, that he becomes a true lead back and Zeke sort of playing the supporting role, or will Jerry and Mike McCarthy still have this as close to a maybe a 50-50 or maybe a 60-40 split in this backfield?
I think the rushing attempts are going to continue to be closer to 50-50. And I would not be surprised, Marcus, if we see that actually lean more to Zeke, right? As his knee gets healthier. But the big thing for me that was a takeaway here, Zeke has been staying out on the field pretty much all year in all the passing downs. Whereas early in the offseason, or sorry, even in training camp, mini camps, all of that, the word was we're going to see more Tony Pollard in the 2 minute offense. We're going to see more Tony Pollard just on passing downs, period, which to me always seemed like an easy way that you could get both of these guys involved. Let Zeke handle more of the short yardage work. Fine, even if you want to split the carries, even though Pollard is way, way, way more efficient than Zeke on the ground. Like, listen to this. PFF rushing grade, 89.9 versus 79.6 in favor of Pollard. Missed tackles forced per attempt, 22% versus 13%. The league average is 17. So Zeke's below the league average. Tony Pollard's above it. Yards after contact. This is one you might think Zeke would lead, 2.7. Tony Pollard, 4.3. And I know a lot of people are like, well, that's because a couple of runs he broke that were really long. Right. That leads me to my next point. Explosive carries, 10 plus yards or more. 17% of the time, Tony Pollard touches the ball in the backfield as a running back, handing it to him, not throwing it to him. 17% of the times that carry goes for 10 plus yards. The NFL average for the last 3 years is 8.5%. Right.
Mm.
So, I mean, he is way, way, way above the league averages. Zeke's below the league average at 6%. So it's not to say Zeke doesn't have a place, but even if they give him, more work on the ground than Pollard, the big thing I saw here, Marcus, was that the actual role, the 2-minute offense, the passing downs, it finally came to fruition. I think they finally decided, okay, we can't, we're not gonna, bruise Zeke's ego. We're gonna let him split the carries. But it was Pollard out there on passing downs, 59% route participation. That's the best that it's been for him all season. Anytime they've been together, available together. And then also just seeing the way that he was actually targeted more. So not just putting him out there, because Zeke, when he's been out there on the passing downs, he hasn't done anything. They don't target him. They don't throw him the ball. And so Pollard, that whole thing changed. And I'm sure most people saw it. One of them was just a swing pass. Pollard hit the Jets, ran it in up the sideline for a touchdown. The other one, he managed to get in a man-to-man coverage situation against the linebacker, running a
Mhm.
wheel route. And well, you guys probably all saw that replay multiple times. It was curtains as soon as that play was called, and Pollard was gone. Did a nice job tracking the ball over his shoulder and caught the long touchdown pass that gave him his second touchdown of the day. So I think there is an opportunity here for that usage to stick. And even again, if Zeke grows that rushing attempt share by a little bit, if Pollard can just hang around and be like between 35 and 40% of the rushing attempts, as long as he keeps the passing role that we saw this last weekend, they can both coexist. And that scenario, that makes Zeke more of a high end RB3. It makes Tony Pollard a mid range RB2, but he's going to have RB1 upside, because you just mentioned a player earlier talking about Austin Eckler. Before Eckler broke out and all of a sudden had all of these carries last year, he was really more limited, right? He was like a 30-40% rushing attempt guy working in the passing game. That's the profile that you're looking for with Tony Pollard. You could also refer back to like 2019 Alvin Kamara. Neither one of those guys had huge rushing attempts. They were both under 40% on the year, but their role in the passing game kept them as top 5 options in fantasy football. And that's what we're hoping for with Tony Pollard. For now, I've said mid-range tight end, RB2, but there's a chance like we're still looking at Pollard as an RB1 the rest of the way.
What I think is even fairly interesting about Pollard too, because I think he's dispelled one of the big concerns about him was that, hey man, he's great, but can he be efficient if he's getting more snaps and more
Yeah.
touches? And I think he has proven that the last few weeks at least, he certainly can. I mean, we saw a couple weeks ago when there was no Zeke and he played, I think 68 snaps, something like that, and it still had a huge game. A couple weeks ago he played 30 snaps, had I think 15 or so touches, had a huge game. So I think a lot of the concerns about whether or not he can still be an efficient, productive player with expanded opportunities, I think we have to put that argument to rest at this point. And Tony Pollard deserves an upgrade, I think, across the spectrum in fantasy at this point. Some, I won't say weirdness in Detroit, but I think we're starting to maybe kind of reevaluate, at least I am, with this backfield. DeAndre Swift has sort of been downgraded for me the last couple of weeks because he's not getting as many snaps. I don't think this is an issue of Swift and ability and fit or what have you in the offense. I think this is an issue of DeAndre Swift just not being fully healthy and the Lions trying to sort of ease him back into things. But Dwayne, even when you hear Swift talk, and he's had some quotes in the last week or so that lead you to believe he knows he's not healthy and doesn't think he may be healthy until we get to the offseason. So for me, that's made it hard for me to start DeAndre Swift. Meanwhile, Jamal Williams keeps plugging along. He's sort of this year's James Conner, it seems like, where maybe the numbers, the production yardage wise, don't blow you away, but the fact that he keeps scoring touchdowns means it's hard to sit Jamal Williams on a weekly basis. So it just seems like the roles have flipped now in Detroit, and Williams is the lead back with DeAndre Swift kind of filling in the gaps whenever the Lions need him to.
Yeah, and over this 3-game win streak for the Lions, they've really tried to lean even more on the ground game. Now, they've shown all year that in neutral game situations, so whenever they're within 3 points, they wanna run the ball. And so with the game scripts tightening up, getting closer, them actually getting to play with a lead a little bit over the last 3 weeks, that's also helped Jamal Williams because he really does get the brunt, of the early down work. And if your offense is operating efficiently, you're staying out of long down and distance scenarios. And so that also is keeping Jamal Williams on the field. So I think there could still be games where we see Jamal's role shift in a more negative light, where we don't quite get what we want out of them. But the Lions are pretty dedicated to making sure he gets his touches, even if the game is trailing, because they also want to get him involved anytime they're inside the 5. So that gives him a chance to score the touchdowns. So I think those are all positive things for Jamal Williams. I agree with you on DeAndre Swift. I moved him into high end RB3, right? He's an upside RB3 because any game that all of a sudden he does get back his normal workload, if that does happen, you're going to wish you had started him. And also, even though he's been very limited, you've got Justin Jackson getting as much work as DeAndre Swift right now. Like it is Jamal Williams kind of as the 50% guy. Then you got 25% basically to Swift and another 25% to Justin Jackson. It was Craig Reynolds. Like Craig Reynolds got hurt and it was like, okay, Justin Jackson, you just take over that role. We don't want to give DeAndre Swift the full workload. And I'm not sure how much of it is injury. I hope that it is injury related, but I know even going back to Hard Knocks, like Deuce Staley was constantly on, DeAndre Swift about not hitting the hole that he wanted him to, not getting the yardage that was there instead of always trying to go for the big play. And it makes you wonder, like, are they also just trying to teach him a lesson? I don't know. But like when I look at Swift, even though he may have those flaws, like he still comes up with huge plays. So like I guess what I wonder with NFL coaches sometimes is I get it. Like when you need 2 yards, you want them to go right where the play should. But what's it worth if the trade-off is that you lose all the explosive plays a guy like DeAndre Swift gives you? Because he gives you plays that it could take you a whole drive to get, and he can do it with one play. And so I just wonder, like, I think some of it does come down to there's something going on there with the coaching staff. And I agree with you. I think it's tough to grade him as anything other than RB3 right now, but at least he's coming through for you, despite like he's still getting around 10 opportunities a game. Like if you look at it over the last 3 games. So it's not terrible. It's not great, but because he is efficient, he still gives you a chance to score 10 to 15 PPR points. If you're in a standard league, it's definitely tougher to put Swift in your lineup.
Right. And, he scored touchdowns the last couple of weeks, which has definitely helped. But I always like to say touchdowns are fickle beasts. It's hard to count on that, especially when Jamal Williams is the guy
Yes.
getting all the work when they get down near the end zone there. Uh, Devin Singletary, a guy that you just look at the production week to week, and it doesn't blow you away. The floor is kind of low. The ceiling hasn't been super duper high, but the reason I keep coming back to him is just because he is the guy. I think he played, 72% of the snaps, I believe it was last week. He's been around that 70 to 75% snap share pretty much all season long. So even if the numbers aren't huge, Dwayne, it's just the fact that he's always on the field in an offense that I know the Bills are kind of struggling. They haven't been super explosive, but we know the potential of this offense. And that, for me, makes it hard to completely get away from Devin Singletary in any particular week.
Yeah, you nailed it, man. Like, and even with this addition of Naheem Hines, like, what is going on in Buffalo? They love these passing down backs, but geez, like they don't use them.
They don't use them, right?
James Cook has been turned into a grinder. Naheem Hines is not on the field yet. They were all in on J.D. McKissick. They went after Chase Edmonds. Like, what do they want these guys for? Like, I don't know. Like, they don't use them that way, and so that's been the biggest thing for me. Devin Singletary, I thought once Naheem Hines got here that probably within 2 or 3 weeks he would lose a lot of the passing down work. Now, who knows? Maybe that happens, but all I can say is, Cook could not get that from him, and now it appears Hines is also unable to take that role away from him. And as long as that sticks, which for Singletary over the last 4 games, last 3 games since Hines has been there, 2 minute offense, he's had 80% of the snaps, 100% and 100%. Like not a sniff even, for Naheem Hines. So as long as Singletary keeps that, like in a pass heavy offense, it's going to be hard to your point, like to move him, down, even though he's not like this guy that you look at and you're like, oh my God, I can't wait to start him. But he's quietly over the last 2 games, RB11 and RB9 finishes. So I mean, he's really done well. Like he's got multiple finishes inside the top 15 now this season. He's got a couple of stinkers in there, but not none that are 2. He's got 2 where he finished outside. I guess he's got 3 games where he's finished outside the top 36. Other than that, at least he's been an RB3.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about these backs, right? They get James Cook, who we think is going to take a whole lot of passing down work. They get rid of Zach Moss, and now it's like they're trying to turn James Cook into Zach Moss. And I'm like,
I don't get it. I don't
I
understand.
can't figure it out for the life of me.
Can't make it work.
Yeah, I don't really understand that there. Looking at a wide receiver, and Darius Slayton had very quietly been putting together a nice string of games. Now you throw in the fact that unfortunately Wandale Robinson is gone for the year. He suffered an ACL injury, and certainly wish him the best in his recovery there. Kenny Galladay is Kenny Galladay had 2 catches on Sunday, which doubled his season total to 4. So things are going great there for him. They cannot for anything find consistent wide receivers there in New York. But Darius Slayton, I think as a supplemental wide receiver, maybe a wide receiver 3, a low end wide receiver 2 at best. I think he's been very consistent in an offense that, like I said, they are thirsty for consistent pass catchers there in New York.
Yeah, and so Darius Slayton making it into the utilization report is probably like like if I was giving away an award for the season, like the most surprising player to make the utilization report in the year, it would be Slayton. And the reason why is I am very, 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 very hard on players that have not shown they can demand any sort of target share in the past. And Slayton, while he had a nice rookie season that we can go back to where he caught some long balls, he had a nice yards per route run. He scored some touchdowns that year. He's never been a target earner. Like his career high targets per route run, 17%. I like using the yards per route run with players like him who haven't been in full time roles, right? Because target share, I at least want to give him credit. Look, when you were on the field, did you show me? And even then, like a wide receiver 3 historically in fantasy football back to 2011 is going to post a 21% targets per route run. So he had been well below what a wide receiver 3 looks like. In fact, the number I just gave you for him is much more like a wide receiver 5. And that was his career high. He's had seasons that have been lower than that. However, if you post strong enough evidence week after week, I can't ignore it anymore. And to your point, he's been very consistent. And I was just to the point where I was like, I honestly wasn't going to put him in. And that's why I have to be careful every time I'm doing the utilization report. And that's why I spend so much time on it, is making sure I'm not letting like my blinders keep me from doing something. And as I looked at it, I was like, well, man, like looking since week 5, 28% target share. Then he had 13%, but then listen, 21%, 20%, 24%, 24%. He's got a career high targets per route run, 20%. I only went back to week 5 because that's when he finally took over at least 60% of the routes. So since he's been in a quote unquote full-time role, this guy's been producing. And across that period, Marcus, top 24 finishes, he's had 4 of them in the 6 games. So not only is he getting the utilization, not only is he seeing targets, hey, the process is right, he's also scoring fantasy points with it. Now, he hasn't had a blow up game, but that could change, man. Wandale Robinson now out for the season. Really, I hate that for him. He was having a breakout game last weekend, was looking really good. But with that, 87% route participation last week for Slayton, that is a season high. So even up until recently, even though he had expanded his role, he was still seeing more like what you would expect a slot receiver to see in route participation, like usually around 70%. And on a team like the Giants that like to run the ball, they like to keep the game close. They basically want to win by not making mistakes. It can make it tough. You need to be out there all the time. And so now he's trending towards an every down role. You have Wandale Robinson out for the season. There's less target competition. The next closest guy on the Giants, I believe, I don't have it right in front of me, I think is a 17% targets per route run, and that is Richie James.
Hmm.
Richie James has not been able to stay healthy. He's actually hurt right now. He was limited today. So he could come in and take some of the slot work. But with Slayton, the other thing I like, Marcus, I thought this was really cool. He also saw a season high 48% of his routes came from the slot last weekend. So if he's a guy that they're going to move around, they're going to put him in an every down role. I couldn't keep him off the utilization report because he had already done his part and now he's got a role that's expanding. I really do like him. I like what you said. He's a wide receiver 3, but he's already been performing like a wide receiver 2. And he's probably due for a blow up game. So even though he's had these nice finishes, it's been 13.9, 14.8, 11.6, 18.5, 13.6. Some of that is other people not blowing up and you managing to be in the top 24. But at the same time, with the usage he's seeing, like, would it surprise me if he dropped a 30 pointer on us? It wouldn't at this point.
Right. And again, for a guy that you probably scooped off the waiver wire in your league, the fact that he's just consistently giving you, 10, 11, 12, 13 points a week, I think that's, you can't really ask for much more than that. And then when the blow up game comes, you feel pretty smart about yourself. So, I know the Giants passing game is sort of icky to think about, but here it is, a guy who's
But it's
doing the
just
most.
him.
It's
So
just him.
yeah.
It is just him at this point. TJ Hawkinson, we all sort of said that when he went from Detroit to Minnesota that not much was going to change, and I don't know that much really has changed. Maybe he's production wise gotten a little bit better. I know you've given him an upgrade, but either way, I mean, I looked at it. He right now is the tight end 3. He's like 100 points behind Travis Kelsey right now because that gap just keeps
The
growing.
king.
But in a world where we just keep losing tight ends, we've lost Zach Ertz, Dallas Goddard is out for a while. Guys just can't stay healthy in that spot. TJ Hawkinson, I mean, he has the look of a top 5 tight end maybe the rest of the season now.
Yeah, man. In 3 games with the Vikings, 26% target share.
Mm-hmm.
It was 15% in Detroit in games where Amon-Ra St. Brown was active. So what's going on here is interesting because if you remember when Hawkinson first came over to the Vikings, I didn't really think there would be any sort of upgrade for him. And sometimes these things are nuanced and it's hard to figure, but I was wrong in that. And looking back now, like if you think about where Amon-Ra St. Brown operates in the field, underneath, intermediate, in the middle, where does TJ Hawkinson operate? Same area. So
Mm-hmm.
he was having to compete with an absolute alpha, not just for targets, but in the same area where things are probably also being schemed to go to St. Brown, the better player, quicker, like as the first read. And so now with Minnesota, it's not the fact that he doesn't have to deal with a target monster. In fact, like Justin Jefferson's had target shares of 30%, 33%, and 18% in the 3 games with Hawkinson. Yet Hawkinson's still been able to come through and demand his own targets. And if you look at it, they work in very different areas. Justin Jefferson usually lines up outside. He's working deeper down the field. And so now they've become more complementary to one another. So I think what's happened here is really he's just replaced Adam Thielen. He has knocked Adam Thielen down the pecking order. And now we have TJ Hawkinson, this young former first round, tight end, really starting to show up. I mean, his 25% targets per route run over the last 3 games, 83% route participation. So those are really, really strong numbers. And you've heard me talk about this in the past, but when you look at the 80% targets per route run, and then you look for over 20%, or sorry, over 80% route participation and over 20% targets per route run. And historically, you just filter on that on any spreadsheet that you can find on the planet. If you can filter by those 2 things and you can filter then to tight end, you're going to like what you see. You're going to see tight end 1, tight end 1, tight end 2, tight end 1, tight end 3, tight end 3, tight end 4. I mean, the lowest you'll see is a tight end 10 since 2011 when you've done those things. So he's in a really good spot. And I hate that it kind of comes because, even you mentioned it, like we're losing guys. So
Mm-hmm.
by the nature of that, Hawkinson's moving up. But what I would tell you is even if Zach Ertz was still around, even if Dallas Goddard was still healthy, I would still consider putting him. I would move him. He would have already moved ahead of Ertz,
Mm-hmm.
and I would be considering putting him over Goddard because I think that he's shown us that he can earn these targets in a complementary way to another target alpha. And he's a young guy with really good draft capital. I know Goddard is as well, but he's got 2 other really good targets to deal with. Right now in Minnesota, there's only one other really good target, and it's Justin Jefferson. So I really do like TJ Hawkinson. I think you nailed it where you said he should be. He's my tight end 3 the rest of the way now. Now he's clearly in a tier below. Well, I guess really there's probably 3 tiers just to start. There's Travis Kelsey, then there's Mark Andrews, who honestly would be close to Kelsey had he been healthy to this point,
Mm-hmm.
but still behind him. And then you would have the beginning of the next tier, like this little group of guys. But like I like him over George Kittle. I like him over Dallas Goddard the rest of the way. I like him over Dalton Schultz, who we really like, but he's
Mm-hmm.
still been battling the knee injury thing. So I don't know where you are, but yeah, I feel great about him.
No, I definitely do because I mean, yes, it is about some of the guys who aren't there, but it's also a lot about just what they're
Yeah.
doing with him and how they're using him. And I think you're spot on about how he's just a great fit for Kirk Cousins. And I know that after the trade was made, Cousins was quoted as saying, that, "Yeah, no, I studied him. I watched his film at Iowa." And sometimes you always wonder whether or not
Yeah.
that's just a player being complimentary about a new guy coming in. But the way that Hawkinson's been used leads you to believe that maybe Cousins did go back and watch some of that Iowa game tape with TJ Hawkinson. He's one of those many guys that have been saddled, unfortunately, with the whole baby Gronk label when they come into the league, which to me is like it's sort of like all the basketball players who got crowned the next Michael Jordan, which is just a completely unfair title to hang
Who
on
was it?
anybody.
God, what was the guy in Miami? Was it something
Harold Miner.
Minor?
Harold
Harold, yeah,
Miner. Yeah.
Harold Minor,
Yep.
man. I
Baby
feel for the
Jordan.
guy.
Yeah, in fact, a USC guy who he wore 32 instead of 23 because he was left-handed, so he was sort of the reverse of Michael Jordan. That's just an unfair. That's just an insane label. Same with Baby Gronk, right? You're talking about arguably the greatest tight end in NFL history. To be saddled with Baby
Yeah.
Gronk is just completely an unfair comparison to anybody. So that's pretty much our look at the Thursday guys. Let's come back around though and come back to the quarterbacks and talk about some guys that will be playing on Sunday. Lamar Jackson, fantasy wise, it has not been spectacular for him over the last few weeks, but I also feel like he's sort of been forced to play a lot of hero ball. They've struggled keeping guys healthy, whether it's Mark Andrews being hurt, Rashad Bateman being hurt, what have you. It's put a lot on Lamar's shoulders, and the fantasy numbers have not necessarily come together, even with the Ravens winning games. But you still feel like he's an upgrade this week, at least in the utilization factor.
Yeah, I mean, he's a buy low if you still have an opportunity to make a trade. And
Mhm.
so and buy low can also just mean these are guys that if you look at their underlying data points, it says that they should be producing more than they should. So I mean that's another way to think about buy low. Buy low is just kind of more actionable because if you can make a move, you can go get them. But here's what I would say: there are a couple things. One, he ranks second in design rushing attempts at 26%, and he's ninth in scramble rate, 6%. Like, so those two things together just make it really hard to hold a player like Lamar Jackson down long term. He's averaging 9.6 rushing attempts per game. That puts him on, man, he's on pace, Marcus, for 163 carries. Like, we just had this talk. We just had this talk a few weeks ago, but guess who it was about? It was about Justin Fields.
Mhm.
He was not performing well. He started the year QB 23, QB 28, QB 32, QB 25, but his rushing attempts were looking stronger and stronger. They were starting to get him more involved in the design rushing game. And so what did we do? We started talking like this is probably going to pop. Like this is probably going to come full circle and come back to Lamar. Like so since then though, Justin Fields QB 12, QB 9, QB 5, QB 5, QB 1, QB 1, QB 7. What happened? Oh, he's throwing for a lot more yards, you say? No, he's not. Justin Fields is not throwing for a lot more yards. Now he's thrown for some more touchdowns because the offense has become more efficient. They're down inside the 5 more, and he has opportunities to get some of those short passing touchdowns. But dude, this is totally what could happen to Lamar. He could get hot down the stretch because he is a dual threat quarterback. If we have not learned anything this year, like don't let the recency bias on Lamar's performances, dictate the way you're going to feel about him. Like he has the ingredients. They are there and historically these ingredients come through. He is in a cold stretch. Yes, he doesn't have a lot of weapons. But does Justin Fields really have a lot of weapons? Now
No.
people will say, "Oh man, Cole Kmet's great." What did people think about Cole Kmet 4 weeks ago? What do people think about Darnell Mooney 4
Right.
weeks ago, right? I mean, the weapons are complementary. They're similar, right? They're comparable.
Mhm.
Yes, I like Darnell Mooney better than anything, on the outside Jackson has, but Jackson has a better number 1 weapon than Justin Fields by far. He has Mark Andrews.
Mhm.
So, I think the passing games are comparable, and you need to focus on the running attack with, Lamar, and we know that the carries are still there. So, that's what I think it boils down to for me. That makes him someone that, I wanna buy into.
I don't know about you, but I got a slew of questions last week asking should people start Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields, which I totally get. You drafted Lamar Jackson, you probably scooped Justin Fields off the waiver wire early in the season. So it definitely made a lot of sense. I leaned toward Fields and from the numbers wise it worked out, but it was a tough call because as you mentioned, I looked at the weapons around him and I'm like, well, it's sort of the same there, but I went
Yeah.
Fields just because he'd kind of had the hot hand and he just had a better matchup last week. It felt like
And
against the Falcons.
I think Fields was the right call in that
Yeah.
scenario. Like, if you got 2 similar things and one's hot and the other's not, great.
Yeah. Save
But
the guy who's hot.
yeah, but what you just said is the key. Like you just said, they're really the same thing. They are really still the same thing. And I even put out a tweet last week, honestly joking because I knew this was the direction I was going to go. And I said something along, folks in Baltimore are still hoping that Lamar Jackson can one day be as good as Justin Fields. It was a joke, because it was really meant. It was aimed at how many people thought Justin Fields was terrible, right? Even
Right.
though he was getting all those rushing, like it's gonna come full circle. Like it's just gonna happen.
It's Twitter, so I'm guessing that there are a lot of folks who missed the nuance in that.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Of course,
The
always.
Ravens team mom like came after me, just so you
Oh,
can go check that at your own leisure.
oh, I'm sorry for that. Uh,
It's okay.
some other news out of Carolina. There's another change at quarterback. PJ Walker is still hurt. Baker Mayfield looked awful again this past week. So Sam Darnold is starting. Look, I know I tweeted about it. I asked about it on Twitter, but it's actually happening. Uh I don't know, man. I mean, my thought was it can't really be any worse with Baker, but I don't know that that means it's better, right?
Hang on, hold for my thoughts. Okay, I think we can
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah. I feel like that's all we need
It
to
can't
say
be
about
worse.
that,
You
right?
summed
Right?
it up. It
It
cannot be
can't
worse.
it can't be worse. I mean, my hope is that maybe it means something better for DJ Moore. I don't know, but that's about all I got to hold on to there. A couple of running backs we actually touched on earlier in the show, so we don't have to spend a whole lot of time here. But Isaiah Pacheco, Latavius Murray, both upgrades. I think partially because of the players who aren't
Yeah.
there, partially just because of the opportunity. But both of them got an upgrade in utilization for you this week, correct?
Yeah, just due to the opportunity with the other guys out, we can move on.
Yeah. All right. Wide receiver Traylon Burks, and I'll admit to I wasn't off Traylon Burks because we hadn't really seen him. I was just sort of skeptical and hesitant. And I know you always say that, look, you got to try to get in early on some of these guys. And you said it a couple of weeks ago after that first game back he had the big game against the Packers on Thursday Night Football. And some ways sort of like the Giants, where there aren't a whole lot of consistent pass catchers that you like there, a lot of guys that can earn targets. Traylon Burks looks like a guy who can earn targets. So hopefully folks were ahead of the curve. Otherwise, I don't know, scour the waiver wire, hope he's out there right now
Mm.
because there does look like there's a lot of opportunity to be had for the rookie in Tennessee.
Yeah, before the Tuesday night run, right now, as we're recording this, 79% of Yahoo leagues, he's available, right?
Mhm.
So he's still going to be available some by the time someone hears this. So I would definitely be looking at your waiver wire whenever you hear us bring up the name Traylon Burks. And if he's available, you should really try to find a way to get him onto your roster. So here's the big thing for me with him, Marcus. I mean, we already know the draft capital, early first round pick, or sorry, mid first round pick for Tennessee. You did a great job of summarizing the fact that there's really no one challenging for targets. Right now, like the next highest player as far as targets per route run on the team, like is like around a 16,
Mhm.
17%, something like that. So it's not very rich from a competition standpoint. And Nick Westbrook-Akini, even though he had that blow up game a couple of weeks ago, like his career targets per route run is like 11%. So it's not a guy that's really going to challenge. Robert Woods really getting a little bit long in the tooth, but the number that sticks out to me the most for Traylon Burks, he's only played 6 games this season. His targets per route run, 3 times he's eclipsed 35% or more. He
Oh.
had week 1 a 38% target rate, week 2 35%, and week 11 38%. Those are monster numbers. And this is a guy that's an athlete. This is a guy that can do a lot. Not just can he get open so you can get him the ball. Once he has the ball in his hands, he could be a beast. And you saw him at the end of that game just go out muscle Jair Alexander and beat him. Like that's a really good cornerback. So all things are positive for Traylon Burks, like you mentioned. Hopefully people have already got him. But if you didn't, he's still available quite a bit. And the profile is screaming that this guy's just dripping with talent. So he's a guy that we need to prioritize. I get it. Tennessee is a run first offense. But if we took that and we roll it back 4 years ago, and we're nah, Tennessee's a run first offense. Guess who you would have missed on the waiver wire?
Probably AJ
AJ
Brown.
Brown.
Yep.
AJ Brown. And I get it. As soon as you say, man, you can't compare him to AJ Brown, I sure I can. You
Yeah.
didn't know AJ Brown was AJ Brown until he was. Most people said the same thing about AJ Brown when this happened. Oh man, run first offense. Can't use AJ Brown. He's not going to be out there. Look, it happened. Corey Davis was on that team. Corey Davis was better than anything competing right now with Traylon Burks for targets here.
Well, and look, when you go back to his draft profile, Traylon Burks was sort of comped as kind of a poor man's AJ Brown.
He
He was
was.
part of the reason that the Titans traded AJ Brown to Philadelphia to replace him with Traylon Burks. So sometimes past can be prologue. So maybe we go back to that and we start to think about it in that respect. Tight end Tyler Higbee, who I won't say he's the only thing remaining in the Rams offense, but pretty close to it. It was nice to see Allen Robinson score a touchdown last week, but Tyler Higbee kind of the one thing we've been able to count on, not named Cooper Cup all season long. You have him as an upgrade. Any concerns about Matthew Stafford, who left with a concussion last week? It's been a couple now in the last 3 weeks for him in concussion protocol. Any concerns that it might be Higbee trying to survive with John Wolford or Bryce Perkins at quarterback?
It could be, and that's definitely concerning. But the variety of targets that Tyler Higbee gets are typically all underneath the coverage, right? He's typically you got everybody else running the coverage off, and he's just kind of the guy that they get the ball to underneath. So most quarterbacks can make that connection. We would obviously prefer it to be Matthew Stafford because if there's going to be any upside to the Rams offense whatsoever, like it's going to have to come with Stafford helping them get there. But having said all that, like the big thing for Higby is this, if you look at it going back to week 6, there was a big change in the way that they wanted to handle or what they were asking him to do, and they were asking him to stay in and block more because their offensive line is so bad. So it was understandable. And over that stretch, there was a 4-game period where he had a tight end 50, a tight end 35, tight end 55, and then a tight end 5 finish. So only one usable game. Like tight end 55, people are thinking, are there even 55 tight ends in the league? I don't know. That's just what the sheet in front of me says. Tight end 55. It was really bad, you know. But looking at it now, this last week, that changed. They kind of threw caution to the wind. Cooper Cup wasn't available, and I think they thought, well, screw it. Like Cup's not here. We can't have him blocking. Like he's got to be out there. And so he had his second highest route participation of the season at 89%. His targets per route run have been there all along. Like he's been having a career year. So now with the routes back, knowing that he's going to be, I think he will be the clear number one target on the team for the rest of the way. Unless they do get Cooper Cup back at the very end, the season, which he's out 6 to 8 weeks is the latest that we've got on Cooper Cup. I do think that Higbee is the number one in the offense. Hopefully it is with Stafford, but even if not, I think he could still be a low end tight end one. If you get Stafford back, he has a chance to really reestablish himself as more like that mid tier tight end one. Could be, chasing a guy like Hawkinson.
Well, and you talk about Higbee, and we talk about T.J. Hawkinson, and sort of running those short intermediate routes for Kirk Cousins to get the ball out quickly. When you've got an offensive line as bad as what the Rams have, you need an outlet that you can get the ball out quickly
Yeah.
to, and that looks like it could be Tyler Higbee, who right now is still a top 10 tight end, and very much in the swing of things there in Los Angeles for an offense that's trying to, I don't know, just figure out something to end the year. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I don't know anything, but I would be surprised if Cooper Cup comes back at all this year. It doesn't really make sense with the Rams pretty much out of contention. Why would you even risk it at this point to bring him back? It's so late in the season for really nothing to play for. That has a lot to do with the utilization report. You can go check that out, of course, at fantasylife.com. You can go check out sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already. I always try to remind you of that each and every week. And all of the tools, including the one we talked about, the Game Hub, which just launched over at the website. By the way, if you subscribe to the newsletter, you can get some of Matt LaMarca's early betting looks. Right now, he's got the Bills as a big favorite coming up this week against the Detroit Lions. I would assume that the Bills stay in Detroit after having played there last week. I would think it made sense, right? Like you
I think
wouldn't.
they were going home.
Oh, okay.
Actually, is what I heard is that
All
they were
right.
gonna go home. So that was the latest I had heard.
Okay.
That was
So
on game day that I heard that.
got it. So they are back to be at back home. They can go and chill out and sleep in their own beds for a few days, and then they will travel back to Detroit for Thanksgiving. So we'll see them there. But they're a big favorite. So go check out Matt LaMarca's picks over there. Use the promo code Fantasy Life on BetMGM. So get in on all the action there because a lot of good stuff happening, especially with the 3 games coming up on Thursday. Before we get out of here, a couple of teams in the NFC really flexed in a big way in week 11. The Cowboys go out and just thump the Minnesota Vikings 40-3. I mean, this was not them beating up on a bad team. This is them beating up on a team that had been at the top of the NFC standings before that week. So they get the big win. The 49ers go down to Mexico City and throttle the Arizona Cardinals there with sort of everybody getting involved in the show. All season long, we've looked and said, the Eagles look like the team to beat, at least on paper, in the NFC. But Dwayne, now it looks like there are 2 other teams that are very much in contention for the NFC Championship. I mean, do we really believe that the Cowboys and the 49ers are actually for real for the remaining weeks of the regular season?
I think they could be. Dallas really handed the game away the week before against Green
Mhm.
Bay. Like they had that game won. Going into the fourth quarter, like there was no way the Cowboys were losing. They let their foot off the gas. Aaron Rodgers did Aaron Rodgers things. Christian Watson had his breakout game. And it can happen. It can happen. Hasn't happened much for Rodgers this year, but he is a Cowboy killer for sure.
Mhm.
Um, but I think overall, when you look at it, like they have the recipe. They've got a defense that can create turnovers. They've got a defense that can, help add to a lead, create a lead for an offense. And in a year where really defenses are aiming to take away, the big pass plays, the Cowboys have kind of evolved into this team that can really operate doing a lot underneath. And then they set things up that eventually pop things free for CD Lamb for big plays down the field. And you'll notice they're not just CD out here running an out and up route, right? Or just running a go route. Like it'll be more of a concept where he's running a drag across the field and then all of a sudden he cuts it up on the other side. Because there's so much zone coverage. Like those are the kind of things you have to do now. And they take a little bit longer to develop. And so I think, Dallas using play action, keeping the run game balanced. They run with a lot of tempo. I think there's a lot of things to like there. And I think, honestly, they just saw this last weekend. You can go sign Odell Beckham Jr. if you want. But I think the easiest way to make this passing game just continue to pop is you've got CD, you've got Schultz. They're really your main guys. Gallup's fine. He can be there when you need him. But getting Tony Pollard involved in the passing game. Like, this is a guy that his yards per route run, 1.71. That ranks fifth in the NFL right now for running backs. This is a guy that's historically been really good as far as his yards per route run, targets per route run. They just need to get Pollard touches in the passing game. And again, especially with so much coverage over the top. And, if you do manage to catch them in man coverage, and they're going to see plenty of that this weekend, the Giants are one of the heaviest man coverage teams in the league. Just typically will push targets away from running backs. But when you have a guy like Pollard that you can put him on a wheel route and all of a sudden he can beat someone deep, that's great. As far as the 49ers, man, I would lean to you. Like you're probably the better expert than me. Like these
Mhm.
are our two kind of our, you root for the
Right.
Niners and I love the Cowboys. But what I will say with the 49ers, man, we've talked about it all along. We've talked about their weapons. And they are loaded. And we
Mhm.
saw the game. We've also, I think, put Jimmy G up as the streamer every week.
Right. Yep.
And so he hit in a big way. If you look at Jimmy G, man, similar to what we talked about with Dak, like he's basically over 250 yards every game in the last four. He's got at least two touchdowns in the last four. And then this past Monday, he had four. And what's funny is, like, look at the way they came. Throw two of those to George Kittle, and Kittle just takes off. Like
Right.
Kittle's just like, you're not getting me. Like I'm taking off. I'm an elite athlete, and even if you get to me, like you're not tackling me. Like the Cardinals didn't even want to try to tackle Kittle on
Right.
the on the long touchdown at the end. They're like, maybe not. Debo just busting one loose on a great design. So there's just the playmakers, man. And now you got CMC out of the backfield. Like it's just an absolute nightmare as long as, they can keep the defense healthy, which is happening. Like the
Mhm.
defense is getting healthier and then it's all coming together at the right time. What's funny? The worst matchup that could happen for the Cowboys in the playoffs would be
The
to play this
49ers.
team
They
because
play the
they can
49ers.
punch you in the face and they can run the ball, which would negate Dallas's ability to let guys like Micah Parsons and Demarcus Lawrence just get after the passer. And I mean, the 49ers could come out and run the ball 60% of the time probably and beat Dallas
Right.
because
I mean,
Dallas has no interior defenders.
and that's a thing that the Niners have done successfully against the Rams. Now, the Rams won the NFC Championship game last year, but not without a lot of struggle because the Niners would come out and be physical. They'd run the football defensively. They'd come and punch you in the mouth, and they would make life hard for you. And we're seeing that again this year. I laughed when the halftime interview. They talked about Kyle Shanahan saying, I have so many weapons. I don't know how to get everybody involved in it. And I thought about poor Steve Wilkes down in Carolina, who's now on his third quarterback in the last couple of weeks, just probably flipping the double bird to the TV, hearing Kyle Shanahan say something like that. But they're getting everybody involved, and I think it really has. You've seen Garoppolo get a lot more comfortable. I think about that first touchdown to Kittle, where he was sort of off his platform there. He had to evade pressure, get out of the pocket, kind of run toward the line of scrimmage, and then make that flip downfield to Kittle. I don't know that that's something you'd see Garoppolo do in years past, but I think with defenses having to be so spread out and pay attention to so many things, it's allowed him to maybe freelance a little bit more than we've seen. And defensively, what D'Amico Ryans has done with that group has been absolutely amazing. The fact that they get so much pressure by not having the blitz. It definitely helps when you have a guy like Nick Bosa on one side just wrecking offensive lines, and a guy like Fred Warner who just seems to be everywhere. And then in the backside, you got Talanoa Hufanga, who's been just he looks like Troy Polamalu sort of reincarnated in his first couple years here in the league. Um, these two teams are really, really getting after it. Look, I will say this. I am of an age where, when the Cowboys and 49ers played, especially in the playoffs, it was appointment television. It was a thing to be
Yep.
seen. Look, I know the Eagles are still very much in the conversation. They're 9-1. We can't discount them. But man, I can imagine another potential 49er Cowboy matchup in the playoffs that Dwayne, it would absolutely, I think, be must-see television if these teams got together, considering the way they're playing right now. They've just been really that good the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Eagles, we still probably both consider the favorites.
Yeah.
They're a little bit of a lull right now, but there's a lot to peaking at the right time. Having your team peak at the right time. And the 49ers and Cowboys, they've got to stack a couple more good games on top of these, right? These are teams that have really been a little bit inconsistent. And
Mhm.
so now we need to see the consistency. The Eagles, it's like they've been so consistent. Now they have a little lull, and everybody's like, ah, yeah, leadership gone. It just happens. It's just like what we talk about with some of these players, where all of a sudden they have 3 bad games, but all the utilization and everything is there. So, I do like it though, because I just feel like it was kinda like it's the Eagles and who. Now
Right.
at least you feel like maybe we could get an eventful, playoffs, right, over on the NFC side. And, I guarantee you, like, Philadelphia likes the older versions that they were seeing of these 2 teams better than what they're seeing over the last few games.
Absolutely. You talk about teams hitting a lull. I mean, the Bills have a stretch where they're not playing well. They lose a
Yeah,
couple games back to
exactly.
back, and everybody freaks out. It's like they're still 7-3. They're still very much on track to win the division. At worst, maybe be the 2 seed in the AFC. Like, sometimes I think we kind of lose sight of the forest for the trees when we talk about this in a week to week situation. So, as I mentioned, this is our only show for the week. So, Dwayne, happy Thanksgiving to you and the fam. I've
You too,
enjoyed the
man.
season so far. I know we got a lot left to go, but man, I look forward to taking a break at least, getting a little turkey, watching some football, and we'll come back and do this next week. It should be fun again, right?
Absolutely. It will always be fun because 'cause I'm getting to hang out with
Absolutely.
you, Marcus, but do appreciate you, and happy Thanksgiving to you and yours as well.
Same to all of you out there listening. By the way, happy Thanksgiving to you, Jordan, too. We appreciate all the work you do to help us get this show up each and every week. But
Thanks, guys.
for everybody out
It's
there,
Jordan.
it's Jordan. He's a voice in a box, but we
For the
appreciate you, brother.
holidays, I'll come out for you guys. That's how we do it here at Fantasy Life. Thanks to everybody, and be sure to just keep it locked on Fantasy Life. We got a lot of cool stuff coming.
Absolutely. Do what Jordan says. Keep the lock on Fantasy Life. Go check out the tools. Go sign up for the newsletter, the whole nine. But for the rest of you out there, please enjoy your Thanksgiving. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy. Enjoy week 12 to its fullest. And we'll talk to all of you next week.